Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Teresa Maston. I'm the chair of the Department of Advertising and Public Relations. Welcome to the second annual Data Day event. Today's program is the 2019 Edward Dabrowski Lecture, presented annually by the College of Communication Arts and Sciences. Digital data are transforming our work in so many ways. In the advertising industry, how can we measure the impact of our work? How can we know the size of our digital audiences and the patterns of our social lives and how we connect with one another via platforms like Instagram, and how we learn about news and what's happening in our world? We'll hear about all of these topics from our distinguished speakers today. What we call computational communication is also a key focus area for us here in the college. Our researchers are using new methods and large digital data sets to answer questions like, how do news messages travel across social media platforms and why? Why does misinformation spread so quickly? How can social media facilitate collaboration? How can online communities support people who are struggling with health issues? Our day-to-day events are designed to highlight the exciting work being done by faculty, students, alumni, and others who work with digital data of all kinds, and to give all of you a glimpse of what careers in data might look like. We're excited to see all of you here. Thank you for joining us. Now I'd like to hand it over to Kirsten Thorson, Associate Professor in Advertising, Public Relations, and Journalism. Kirsten is the moderator of the Data Day event and will introduce the key speakers and overview the event. Kirsten.
Hello, everybody. So I'm super excited that you are all here today. This is our second annual Data Day, which I kind of can't believe, because even in the 1 year since we've had our first Data Day event, it seems like the entire world of data has transformed us once again. In the year since we had this event last time, GDPR regulations went into place, getting all of us to think and pushing us all to think in new ways about how we can use data. The industries that matter to our college, the communication industries, are moving forward by leaps and bounds in terms of innovating in the ways that data are used every day to drive strategy, to evaluate what we do, to make decisions about how we can even design the technological platforms that are increasingly are the fabric of our everyday lives. So I'm super excited to be part of that. I know I'm very excited that we get to have this conversation, not just in our classrooms, but now today also with some wonderful people who are here to talk to you about their lives in data. I'm sure they have lives outside of data, but mostly they're going to talk about their lives in data today as well. So here's the plan of the event. So we will have first a keynote address. Then we'll have just a couple of minutes for Q&A directly about the keynote. So think up your questions if you have them, and I'll invite you forward after that. And then we will invite the rest of our panelists to come up, and we will have a conversation about their careers, about how they use data in their lives, about how they use data to drive strategic insights of various kinds. And then after that, we'll have 10 minutes or so for a few more questions as well. I'll be moderating the panel, and I did collect questions from many of you, so I've tried to seed those in many places as possible. But if you have questions, please kind of scribble them down and save them till the end, and we'll invite you to come up. So, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Amy Sample. Amy is Vice President of Business Intelligence at PBS. She has been analyzing digital consumer behavior for more than 20 years. I first learned about Amy's work, as many of you know, in my role as instructor of our digital analytics class, where I constantly am stalking the internet to try to find the very best case studies I can of how people are using digital data in the industry. And so we have been learning a little bit about what Amy does, and I'm super excited for you to hear a lot more about what she does here today. In addition, she is chair of the board of directors for the Digital Analytics Association and served as a co-founder of the Washington, D.C. chapter of that organization. I've spent some time with her today, and I can say that almost her only flaw is that she is not an alum of MSU, which we don't hold against her. She has an MBA from Georgetown and a degree in marketing from DePaul. So welcome, Amy. We are thrilled to have you. Come on up.
Thanks, Kirsten. Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today. I was glad to come from DC and talk to our local station here this morning and talk to all of you this afternoon. Today, I'm going to give you a little bit of a tour of how I ended up in data. It might not surprise you that when I was graduating from college, none of this existed. So I'll tell you a little bit how I ended up there. Those of us who've been in the industry for a long time, most of us accidentally fell into data. And we all have sort of weird transitions for how we got there. So I'll tell you a little bit about that. I'm going to also tell you a little bit about what's going on in the media industry when it comes to data and how we're trying to make sense of that data. I'll give you a couple of case studies, what the industry is happening, and then show you a couple of metrics that we're trying at PBS. So a little bit about me. As I said, I graduated in the mid-90s from DePaul with a degree in marketing. At that point in time, you might remember that there was very little in the internet, and it didn't exist really much. Most people got online through America Online or CompuServe or Prodigy. Windows 95 had just come out, if that tells you anything. And I had my first job as about your age doing this. So I worked in monster truck racing. And my internship was working in the marketing and promotions department of at the time, the largest company doing monster truck racing. This was the star, Gravedigger. So everybody wanted Gravedigger to win. And my first job, I got to learn all about making point-of-purchase displays or sending tickets to radio stations in exchange for ad time on the radio. Fun job, exciting, but the best thing I got out of it is an interesting thing to when you have icebreakers to tell something that you would be surprising. So I graduated, and after a long job search, trying to figure out what to do next, I landed at a company called Cast Communications, and I'll give you a look at what the internet looked like back then. This was technologically savvy. So I landed this job at Cast Communications, who was working with a site called College Club, which was essentially a social network for college students in the 90s. And our job was to try to put selling advertising onto this site, targeted at college students. And I remember so vividly going to this interview, and the hiring manager told me what I'd be doing, and I was like, wait, you can do that? So that's how early we were. It was the first year of banner advertising, and the whole industry was $1 million. So that's fairly early, right? From there, I got married, moved to DC, spent a little bit of time at USA Today, and then found myself at AOL. And this is what AOL looked like when I started there. I managed to spend about 8 years at AOL. I started out on the advertising side, using data to build packages for advertisers. So put together different sponsorship opportunities for advertisers and tell an audience story. Over time, I managed to move into a role where we were analyzing the performance of our biggest advertisers. And when I say big advertisers, I mean really big ones. The performance of Amazon, eBay, Google. These were the early advertisers on AOL. My job was to look at how those campaigns were performing and look for opportunities where we could improve performance so we could keep those dollars in, because it was big dollars at that time. I then moved into a role in a product organization where I was analyzing consumer behaviors, trying to determine early fringe behaviors where we might be able to build a product around. So sort of looking at unmet needs and where could we identify some things that were kind of leading edge behaviors. One of the things that we discovered when I was in that role is we noticed that young people were using AOL Instant Messenger at the time, no longer exists, but were using the away messages in their Instant Messenger to communicate with their friends. So they'd put things like in the away message, gone to the party down the hall, go find me there, or at the dining hall. And we couldn't quite figure out what to do with that. We knew there was something there, but we couldn't figure out what to do with it. Well, a little something called Twitter came along and kind of took exactly that behavior. So it's interesting when you're had the opportunity to study behaviors at the very fringe, but not quite know what to do with it. Finally, I ended up in a role in consumer research, and you might say, well, wait, how does that relate? It really didn't, but I learned how to run focus groups and conduct surveys and do user testing, And I did that for some of the biggest brands that AOL had at the time. So AOL Instant Messenger was one of my products that I worked on, but also some premium services, understanding who was going to buy those. As many people do in a large company like that, when it's on its downward spiral, I ended up getting laid off. You haven't worked in digital until you've been laid off from a job in digital, and so just know that that will come. But it all worked out for me in the end because I ended up at PBS. And so the woman who had hired me at AOL was at PBS and said, I have this metrics job. Would you like to come work for me? And I said, sure. So she hired me as the first digital analyst. And what was the first thing I did? I went online, I joined the Digital Analytics Association, I learned everything about digital analytics because I had no idea what was digital analytics. But I had been analyzing all this data, so I knew I had the skill set. So I moved to PBS. I started there as the second digital analyst. My job was to come in, I was the team of one, and I had to change us from a tool set. So we were using an old tool called Visual Sciences, no longer exists. It was bought by Omniture, which is now Adobe. And we moved to Google Analytics. And so I went through a tool transition. I went through trying to help our local stations and our producers learn how to use this tool, internal staff. Over the course of time, I built the team to 6 of us. So I started as one, team of 6. And we took on more. We took on user testing, we took on A/B testing, we took on some surveys for stations. We tried to build a educational service for stations on analytics. And we were so successful that 3 years ago, our CEO decided we needed to have a reorg, and they merged the digital analytics team with the traditional TV research team to become business intelligence. So now digital analytics, Nielsen analysis, primary research, we're all one family with the idea of helping to connect the dots across various different data silos to help move the business forward. So now I lead that entire team. So that's linear research, digital analytics, consumer research. And we're really trying to figure out how do we become more efficient? How do we pull our data together and look across data sets? How do we create dashboards and data visualizations so that people can make decisions that are data informed? So as I said, data is evolving in the media landscape. And it's a really interesting time, but it's also a complicated time. Not so long ago, this is what the TV world looked like. The family gathered around the television at an appointed time. They all were watching the same thing, and we had one methodology that everybody sort of agreed on. Now we can question whether we like sample-based methodology or not, but everybody agreed that Nielsen ratings was the currency and life was grand. And it stayed that way for a good 30 or 40 years. But if we fast forward to today, this is what the living room now looks like. And you'll see that the family still gathered around the television, but notice only one person's actually looking at the TV. The kids are all on different devices, and they're all doing something of their own. And we're trying to measure all of this. So we can measure each of these things, but we're trying to get an understanding of media consumption across them. So as I said, we were measuring television. When I came to PBS, we then started distributing our TV programs on station-branded websites, mobile apps, connected TV apps. And we can pretty well measure each of these individually. We kind of know how many people are using each one of these, what content they're using. We don't know a lot about them from a demographic perspective, though. And we don't have any real way to deduplicate that. And we certainly don't have any way to deduplicate that with television. Nielsen, ComScore, Google, they're all trying to tackle this problem. It's really complicated. And so we will have a solution at some point, I'm confident. But in the meantime, brands are trying to make sense of all the data available. If we fast forward a little bit more, suddenly, it didn't just stop there. Suddenly, we're distributing our content on subscription video on demand services like Amazon, Netflix, Hulu. We added in free video on demand, so Comcast and Verizon Fios and Spectrum. Our content's available on all of those. And in the future, you'll see PBS content available on what's called skinny bundles. So those are YouTube TV and Sling, Direct TV Now, those services for the cord cutter. All of these services have their own data sets. Not all of them will share them with the publisher. I can tell you that Netflix and Amazon do not share much information with us at all. But we've introduced a whole set of new data silos, and we're trying to understand the total viewership of programs across all of these things. But wait, it doesn't stop there, because don't forget about these guys. What this used to be was a platform for promoting your content. You used to go there and say, watch Downton Abbey on Sunday at 9, or here's a link to my site so you can go learn more. Increasingly, these have become distribution outlets in and of themselves. So we're now distributing full episode content on many of these. And all of these services have their own data sets as well. All of them don't integrate with each other, and many of them give you a lot of data that doesn't really tell you anything at all. So what are we to do as media analysts in this kind of world? That's what we're grappling with. At the end of the day, what we really want to understand is how are we reaching the person? We want to understand how does that work that we do on Facebook impact their ability to view a program, and then what does that do to their ability to be an advocate for our local station or become a station member? We're trying to look at the holistic world. And we will get there. It's like, as I said, many of the measurement providers are helping. We're going to have to have new currencies, new measurements. The industry is really desperate for a currency that works across platforms. And we will get there. But in the meantime, we have a few things that we're trying. We're going to start with the basics. So I break it down into these 3 buckets: reach, engagement, and impact. No matter what metrics that any one of these providers provide, they all provide you with at least something that lets you understand how many, how often, and to what end. And if you can focus your work there, you can begin to make sense across these different platforms. And we can pull together data, put it side by side, and at least understand how they relate to each other and how they move in correlation or not. So how do we get started? If we break our analysis into these 3 major buckets, we can then start to answer some of these questions from a business perspective. So how big is our audience? Is it growing? Is it small? Is it getting smaller? Is it changing in its platform mix? What do we know about the audience? Who are they? How often do they come? Then we move over to the engagement. We're talking about how often do they come? How often do they interact with us? How long do they view programs? How often do they visit the site or listen to our audio stream? How does this change as we distribute our content onto more platforms? And then for us in public service media, we really are interested in the overall impact. So how do we drive loyalty and advocacy? We want people coming back so that they become supporters and so that they advocate to their legislators, they can maintain public funding, or they come back and we deepen that relationship, they become members of our local stations, and how do we enable them to do that, to provide that support to us? So here I propose for some of for my stakeholders, a few key metrics that allows you to at least begin to connect the dots. So most every platform will give you some number of viewers, unique visitors, fans, followers. That can be your proxy for reach. Engagement, frequency, how often people are using you, time spent, how long when they do, and in the case of video, views. And then when we get to impact, these are some proxies for impact: donations, activations, registrations. If we begin to put all that together side by side, we can begin to tell a story, even though we weren't able to add them all together. So let's look at a couple of attempts in the industry. The first one is from NBC. So NBC did this with the Olympics. They took a methodology called total audience delivery to add up their audience of Olympic viewing on NBC, the NBC Sports Network, and all of their digital properties. So what did they learn? They were able to come up with a total audience measurement. They were using that to guarantee impressions to their advertisers. And in a world where the ratings for the Olympics on NBC had declined, they were actually able to show that they had made up some of the difference when they included these two. Now that's all great from the press release. My team went and tried to back into the numbers, and what we learned is most of what they made up came from the NBC Sports Network, so still on the cable channel. Those digital impressions accounted for just about 2% of that total audience. Most recently in the Super Bowl, CBS had a press release about digital viewing in the Super Bowl was up 37%, but when you actually converted into TV-like metrics, the digital viewing was about 2%, and 98% of the viewing happened on television. So we're still looking at a small audience of viewing television content on digital platforms, but that's going to change, and we know it's going to change, so we need to begin figuring out how to measure it now. Here's another example. This is also from the Olympics. This is from Discovery's Eurosport division. They took a slightly different tack. So they had the rights to the Olympics in Europe, and they decided to measure across all their platforms from video, users, and engagement. So they took a sum of all the videos viewed across all of their different digital platforms and television. They summed all the users of their owned platforms, and then they added up all the likes, shares, comments, and everything on social. So added all those together. Now, from a media researcher's point of view, we kind of get iffy with this because we don't like duplication, and I guarantee you there's duplication there. But at this point, until we have a solution where we can deduplicate the audience, this is probably the best that you can do. So it's a slightly different tact, but another experiment. Now, this one is a little closer to home for me. This is a working group within the public radio led by NPR and a bunch of public radio stations. And they all got together and decided that they're going to establish some metrics around 4 key areas: grow, know, engage, and monetize, and set up a KPI for each one of those across platforms. You'll notice this isn't all that different from my reach, engagement, impact. It's just slightly different words. But again, coming up with at least similar metrics so that you can put them side by side. So as I said, we've been struggling with this a little bit at PBS, and we've been waiting for Nielsen to get its act together and have a solution for us, or somebody else to come up with a solution. But we don't have time to wait. We really need to understand what's happening on TV and how that relates to digital. So we've tried a couple of things, and I'm going to walk you through 3 new metrics that we've been working on to kind of understand the cross-platform dilemma. So the first is PBS total views. We've been doing this for a little over a year, and what we decided to do was to try to convert the TV metric, the traditional TV metric, into a metric that looked like a digital metric so that we could then add them together. So it starts with the reach of the episode, how many people watched that episode. You multiply that then by how many times that episode was watched to get a total view. It's effectively an impression, so you would see that in the advertising world as impressions. And then on the digital side, because we didn't have a whole lot of data, we have our minimum denominator we could have is a stream. So we know that somebody pushed play and it started playing. So we decided we'll add those 2 together and we'll come up with the PBS total view. And that's going to give us a little bit of an indication of what the contribution of digital is to the total viewing. So here's an example. This is from last season. Ken Burns' The Vietnam War. It was a major documentary. It's our big tentpole of the year. And you'll see here that the blue represents the TV views, and the green is digital. And that includes any social or YouTube viewing that we have. And then Comcast Video On Demand is there in that red bar. So for Ken Burns, about 6% of the viewing happened outside of linear broadcast. Now that's pretty high. Usually, for most programs, we see about 2%. Ken Burns, while it's a historical documentary, behaved a little bit more like a drama. So I think part of the explanation is this is a 10-part series that you need to watch sequentially. And so you see a little bit higher contribution. It's hard to watch 10 episodes, which was 18 hours over the course of 2 weeks. So unless you're paid to do that, I think. So this is an interesting way of looking at the data. And it gives us a sense of what it reinforces for our television colleagues that TV is still the big dog in the room, right? But what our aim is to watch this over time. But what they didn't tell us is how deep the engagement was. So we couldn't tell. You just had, if somebody starts a video, you didn't know how long they were watching. So that could be somebody for 10 seconds or 2 hours. And shouldn't we understand that as well? So over the course of the last year and a half, we've been working on our duration measurement within our video players. And we've started now to create a look at an average minute audience. Average minute audience is a standard TV metric. And what we're trying to do now is convert these digital metrics to look like a TV metric so that we can then add those together. And that's what we got here. So we have PBS average minute audience. The way that you understand that is in any given minute of a program, this is the average number of people who are watching during that minute. It's just like a rating. And what we learned is even when you did that, our digital viewing still accounts for about 2% of the viewing. But it gives us a better sense of the contribution. So we had another example of We'll Meet Again was a show that we launched with Facebook participation. 28% of its views were on digital, and that was driven by Facebook. But those Facebook views were only about 30 seconds long. So once we were able to turn it into an average minute audience, we realized that Facebook only represented about 1% of the viewing. It's interesting to just understand how different platforms contribute to your total viewing. And then finally, as I said, frequency is really kind of important in understanding engagement. And one of the things for us, we're not a traditional media company, we're not advertising, we're not selling advertising or monetizing those impressions. But we do really want to understand how each touch point across platforms contributes to the overall relationship with our users. So frequency is really important as it lends itself to being able to build brand equity. You build loyalty and advocacy by people interacting with your brand over and over and over again. It lends itself for learning. We know that people have to interact with a concept more than one time to be able to learn it. And of course, you don't just donate money to something you've seen one time. So increasing that relationship with users lends itself to increased likelihood to donate. Same thing in the children's space. We introduce concepts on different platforms and give different experiences to reinforce that learning concept. So what we did is we took a look at, this is two different charts, and here you'll see the size of, these are all the digital platforms for PBS, the size of the relative audience, and you'll notice that the TV audience is really large. But when we bring in frequency into the picture over here, notice that our audience over here our Amazon Fire TV people who were so small they don't really show up on the chart, they're actually really frequent users. So they're a small audience, but they're visiting the Amazon Fire TV over once a week. So they're really important. So how do we understand how that relates to each other? So what I did is I created a formula to to add up all the frequencies, but weight them by the size of their audience. So that Amazon's 7 visits per month isn't overweighted to the TV when there's only 25,000 of them. And what you got is then this. It's a little something that looks like this. And it lets us understand what that cumulative impact is of all those other touch points. You'll see here, this is our primetime audience, our adults. It's still largely driven by TV. When you look at this for kids, over half of it's these digital platforms and half of it's TV. So it's an interesting way for us to just look and see what deepens our relationship and then lets us understand the drivers that you can pull. So growing an audience on any one of these platforms will change that. Increasing the amount of times they visit will change that. Launching on a new platform will change that. So it's giving us a little way of looking at our audience that's slightly different than a rating. So as I've gone through this, my experiments with different metrics, I have a few lessons that I would love to share. First is start out simple. Don't try to solve the whole problem all at once. You can take one little step and add to it. I would also recommend you adjust your method. You saw we had total views. We then moved to average minute audience. I used to, if you Google me, you'll find some work that I did on a engagement metric that was really kind of complicated. Well, guess what? It was too complicated to explain, so it was too complicated to use. And what we really figured out in that engagement metric is the only thing that actually drove difference in the number was frequency. So why not just focus on frequency, which is something that people can understand. So be willing to adjust as you understand more, and stay focused on what you're trying to achieve. So everything in Analyze comes back to, what are we trying to do? And can we agree on what that is? And then we can measure it. And that tends to be the biggest problem that organizations face. And I'll leave you with this as you head out into the world of analytics. This great quote from Ferris Bueller: life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Ferris was right about one thing: life moves really, really fast. And I do encourage you to stop and look around, but don't look around too long, because this media world is changing so quickly. Be willing to adapt, be curious, be willing to learn some new things. You can't learn all of it, and that's okay. We all know that we can't. I'm never gonna be a data scientist, and I'm okay with that. But you do need to keep learning and learn what the new techniques that are coming, and at least be aware of them so that you can talk to people or hire people that know how to do those things. And with that, thank you.
Thank you. How many of you have seen this movie? Oh, yay! That's like everybody, right?
Yay!
It's like so current. So we have time for just 2 questions. If you're willing to, if you could go over to that microphone. I know that seems intense, right? If you're not willing to, I can come around and put this microphone in your face. Do we have a question? I can see you in the lights. Oh, everyone's so nervous. Question?
One in the back.
Oh, see, now there's a rush for questions. I know I'm not supposed to move around because of the cameras. Sorry, everybody.
Mark Pritchard.
Hi.
Verification, validation, all that kind of stuff, CMO at P&G. How are you guys dealing with that in your digital platforms?
In terms of ad verification?
Or no, just verification of viewership and all that. Because that is a real issue.
It is. We are not really paying, since we're not commercial, those things aren't as big of pressures for us. So we do the best we can on limited budgets. And we are QA, and we've expanded our digital analytics group to have a full-time QA person to validate that the data that we're sending is what we think it's sending. But we're not as big an organization as others are, so we do the best we can.
Hope for the best.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a question over here.
Hi, just a question to clarify the metrics. I was wondering if the metrics are measuring the exposure or the actual consumption of the media, because usually these two are not quite the same. That's the first part of my question, just for curiosity. And second part of my question is about bots. Have you noticed that? Is there any kind of bots that could influence your metrics, as far as you notice?
Yes, so it's attempting to be consumption. So in all of those metrics, we try to focus really on consumption. The views, the total views is where we realized that it wasn't getting enough consumption. So you had at least 30 seconds of viewing, but then it kind of stopped there, right? So that's where the average minute audience came in, to get deeper into how people are consuming that show. And the question about bots, we try to pay attention. We have a lot of alerts in place to see where to do an anomaly detection. But really for us, we use Google Analytics for all of our digital data, and they're pretty good about keeping their bot file up to date as far as I know. But you notice when there's something off, when something looks abnormal.
So tons of interest in the quality of data, which is an interesting,
yes.
That's a very interesting question. So I'm going to call up our other 2 panelists, if you wouldn't mind. So the other 2 members of our panel are actually MSU alums, so although we don't love them more, we love them differently. So thank you both for coming. Kyle Andrews is a user experience researcher at Instagram, where he conducts qualitative and quantitative research to understand perceptions of social media, reactions to new products, and changes. He also teaches classes on social marketing and research methods at George Washington University. And Erica Tackett is a senior account executive at Weber Shandwick, where she leads social media content strategy for the Chevy Trucks product group, which I've super enjoyed learning about, actually. I think I'm halfway sold, not really. She'll tell you a lot about her daily routine. A lot of what her work involves deciding what goes where. And she's also our more recent graduate, so you can look to her to sort of think about what these careers look like in the near term. So over the next few minutes, I'm going to sort of moderate and ask these guys a few questions, and then save up your questions if you have some at the end. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A. So thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Amy. That was really, really interesting. It sounds hard.
It is hard.
Your job sounds a little bit difficult, if I'm being honest. So Erica, let me kick it off with you. Thinking about the clients or the particular client that you work with, how has the increasing availability of all these different kinds of data changed what clients expect you all to deliver to them?
Yeah, so I think it's equal parts with clients many times, education and expectation. So clients, especially if they're in the advertising world, I mean, they're familiar with data, just like many of you are familiar with data. So they understand that, oh, on Facebook, I'll see this many views on a video that we published, or on YouTube, I can expect however many comments. So I think an expectation kind of is set of, oh, well, you as my analytics team, you can pull, all of this user information from Instagram. Well, where the education comes in really is that these platforms, as I'm sure you'll speak to soon, are always changing. So when they are asking us, oh, well, can't you just, pull all of these, different sentiments from Instagram? Well, we can't, because 3 months ago they took away the API, or different details that, again, you can speak much better to than I
Or
can.
not. You don't have
Yeah,
to.
exactly.
It's cool. We're all friends here.
But all of those little nitty-gritty details that it's not really their responsibility to understand is really where the agency and our team comes into play to really continue to educate them while providing them with information that they need to understand their brand and kind of how it's performing.
So in your role, you're sort of between the hardcore data analysis and sort of what the clients need to produce and do.
Very much so. I would almost view myself as a translator. So I work with an analytics team that gives me a crazy report that really breaks down like 30 slides of information on one campaign. Well, my client, for one, doesn't have the time to go through 30 slides, and for two, that's, again, my job and our agency's responsibility to communicate to them. So our team, and definitely a large part of my job, is really looking at that and saying, hey, this is what you need to know. Like these 2 lines, or the too long didn't read, that you can take into a leadership meeting to really kind of wrap up what this performed like on social.
And Amy, I'll ask you this, as we've been talking about this over the course of today, it sounds like, and actually in every case, you have really sort of complex internal structures to deal with the complexities of what you're working on. How has, for PBS, which is like old school in a TV kind of way, right? How has the rise of digital data, and students ask this question as well, changed the culture of PBS, or at least of the parts that you work with?
We certainly, there's a creative aspect to television too. So the creatives tend to be like, oh, I don't need data, I know what I'm doing. But we certainly, especially the last number of years, have at least drifted more to what we call the data informed. So understanding what programs are performing well, what performing programs are worth renewing, what programs are not worth renewing, trying to have a prediction on how you think something might do and what impact that might have on the schedule overall, or whether stations will choose to air that program. But we also use data to do things like windowing analysis. So what that means is the window of availability after something's broadcast. And so there's often decisions to be made. Do we have this masterpiece drama available for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 8 weeks? And what's the impact of if we choose to do it for 2 weeks versus 8 weeks? Recognizing that we're not selling advertising against that, so the impressions don't really matter much, but we want to understand what does that do for other pieces. So there's definitely much more data analysis happening, even though we're in old school.
Do you find people resistant to being informed by data, or?
No, I don't think so largely. I think there are times when we still may make a choice to do things that the data may say, maybe not, because we also are still a mission organization. And so there is our mission to bring things to the American people that other networks won't do. We already know that performance doesn't rate well, but it's our job to bring classical music to America, right? So sometimes we still might do something that the data that tells you not to do. But I would say largely that there's much more, and I get more questions about, just bring me the data to answer that question, and you're like, I don't think we have the data for that.
Well, and how about in the context of Instagram? So obviously there was no Instagram before there was digital data, but also as we've been talking, people who think, oh, Instagram just looks at clicks and how people are using the platform through behavioral data, it sounds like that's not entirely your role, or explain to us what you do with user experience research.
Yeah, exactly. I feel that my role is sort of the counter to that. Or another way, I'm sort of the voice of the consumer inside the company. And so as a UX researcher, you're not the data scientist who's analyzing all the log data. You're the person who's trying to sort of understand, why is log data looking
And so
such
by
a way.
log data, you mean like what people did?
Yes, all those clicks, the things you can collect on the back end. And they don't paint as clear a picture as maybe people might think. They're kind of messy, noisy, and they're sort of backwards looking, not forwards looking. And so in terms of identifying use cases, identifying pain points that users might have with a product, identifying new features they might like, all those things are things you can't see in the data, but come from user experience research.
So how do you do that?
Uh,
What's the secret?
I talk to lots of people.
So interviews, you do interviews.
I do, yeah. It's a mix of qualitative and quantitative. A lot of in-depth interviews, bringing people into the lab and either just talking to them generally about their labs in social media or actually showing them prototypes, like earlier versions of things that we want to change. As the product gets kind of more developed, we can kind of broaden out what we do. And so maybe we'll do a diary study or sort of online research. Once things are in a public test, in addition to the A/B tests that the data scientists will run, I might also run a survey that goes to test and control to see if there are differences in terms of how people, if they notice it, are they satisfied, is it actually moving the needle from a perception standpoint? And so kind of runs the gamut.
And so you told me earlier, so you do research for the feed itself, which I've decided you call feed, so I can say it because I sound cool, right? So like the main feed bit. So tell me about how are decisions made, or what's your role in making decisions about changes to this feed that how many of you are on Instagram?
All right, good job.
This is not a sales moment. So what does the process look like to use research to make a choice to change or to not change something in terms of how the feed works?
Yeah. In terms of like the kinds of research we would do, or
Or how do you decide go, or
Oh, right, yeah. It's a big discussion. The great thing is that it's very decentralized in how we make decisions, and so I'll have a point of view from research I've done, but the data scientists will have their point of view. The product manager will have their point of view based on kind of organizational goals and direction we want to go. The designers are certainly very opinionated, and so we all just sort of argue a lot. In a polite way, and eventually come to sort of decision.
you argue with data though, so that's like a higher quality rationality.
Data wins wins most arguments, and so it's I think it's easy when the user experience data that we collect matches or is in the same direction as the UX data. I'm sorry, the log data that data scientists would have. Where it gets tricky is when there's a conflict between what users say, what it looks like they do, and what direction the company wants to go in. That's where it gets sticky, but
that's when you wish you had a civic mission like
Right.
PBS.
Right.
And so to all of you, whoever wants to jump in first, we talk a lot here about sort of how do we take all of this data and distill it into some sort of insight, right? What does that process look like? What can you talk about a time that you had to do that work, to use some data to sort of distill down into an insight and persuade someone of that? I don't know who wants to jump in. It's a hard question.
I can go. I think my position's a little unique just because I'm not the one that's in the platforms pulling the data every day, but I do work with our analytics team directly to really help kind of find the insight. And for us, it just always baffles me the amount of work that really has to go into finding a really well-reasoned insight. I worked on a campaign recently that we're really just looking at how something performed in the first, let's say, 48 hours it was live, because on our end, we really see most of the engagement from a social perspective within those first 2 days that it's up. It took us like 2 weeks to pull everything. Just with like the sentiment that we wanted to pull, we wanted to see if there was any connection from a news perspective. So we have the social push, our media in any way picking it up. Has there been a flux, like a secondary flux in people going to the page after said media picked it up? It just gets really, really complicated in the weeds. So for me, I'm just always really surprised and honestly impressed with our analytics team when they can really dive into all the data and come up with really one idea that we can present to clients to really show, yes, this performed well, no, it didn't because of this, or so on. Data's amazing. think we can say. Yeah.
How about you? How about the rest of you?
Yeah, I definitely agree that the presentation is really important. And I said earlier, I feel like half my job is trying to disseminate my research throughout the organization and try to convince people of its importance and how it should shape product. And the other half of my job is actually doing the research. And that first part of really disseminating it and persuading is I've learned how important that is the longer I've been there. And it really can be idiosyncratic based on who it is you're trying to present to, but everything from, setting up like a mini museum of research people can walk through, or
A museum of research?
Yeah.
Now that sounds like something everybody would want to go to.
you have to set it up so they have to walk through it to get to like food or something. You have to really make it hard to avoid. Or like,
Offer extra credit.
yeah, exactly. I'll make like dumb videos in iMovie with like, it definitely, I always record my interviews, one camera on the person's face and one on the phone that they're playing around with, because being able to show that to a designer and an engineer is far more persuasive than me summarizing it. And so little tricks like that you learn over time, but it really depends on, the audience you're trying to reach.
So you do the work of distilling all this information to create this like aha moment, which is almost like creative itself, right? I mean, you're almost...
Yeah, that's certainly true. And it's also ways of sort of managing your relationships with people, especially if consumers are really upset about something. Me just going to meetings and like slamming my fist and saying, everyone hates this, right? Like, you're not going to make friends.
People are angry.
Yeah. But if you can sort of like show them people in their own words talking through this and talking through the trouble or the inconvenience it's causing, that's a way of sort of making it seem like you're still on the same team, but also communicating the severity of the issue.
And Amy, in your experience, like you showed us all these amazing charts, and we're persuaded we know a little bit of something about it. How does that work internally to your organization? Do you find yourself doing a lot of that translation work as well?
Yes. So I've always described our role as being the translator. So I really love that you said that because I agree with you. But for us, the strategic imperative of why business intelligence was created was to the organization no longer wanted to hear about data in its silos. They wanted to understand the audience, and that means bringing all of those data sets together somehow. It doesn't mean necessarily that we have one magical number that we now work towards, but at least bringing those together and understanding the story of the audience and the content and the way that it's supported. And so that's what we're working towards. It hasn't been easy. So there's, we were talking about earlier this morning about the cultural differences between the way that people who have historically analyzed TV data and the way that people or analyze digital data. And the TV data have a prescribed method that they've learned and grown up with, and they know that. And there's many of them are resistant to the change that's coming from digital. Whereas those people who came up in digital are like, oh, let me learn the TV and I'm going to bolt that on and I'm going to learn how to do this and I'm going to learn how to, and they're a little bit more fluid and flexible. And so working through that and helping everybody cross-train has taken some time too, so that the digital people can understand TV language. It's two different languages. It's like if you're speaking Spanish and Greek and you're trying to understand each other. And so it's taken us that time. I think we're getting closer though.
And it sounds like, I don't know if this is surprising anyone else in the room, you think of like, oh, here's the way to do research. Like we're gonna teach you the way to do research. But essentially what you just told us is you're inventing the way to do this work, right? You get to decide those metrics. And
Yeah.
what is that experience like? Do you think of yourself as like an inventor or?
I think that's the interesting place where we are right now in media is there aren't, the currency that we had is being broken up. And so until there's a new currency, everybody's kind of scrambling around to figure out what it could be. Advertisers are wanting a new currency. The agencies want to be able to talk to their clients and have them understand the digital data and the TV data together. And everybody's a little bit impatient, so this industry is working together to try to figure that out. But in the meantime, you still need to understand the audience. And so that's where it's interesting and fascinating, is you get to tap into all the things that you guys taught us, but figure out how to put them together in a different way.
That's cool. And so this next question is a student question. The student asks, more and more data means companies can engage in extreme levels of personalization and customization, but data aren't perfect. Can you tell us about a time when a data-informed strategy led to a bad experience or a poor decision? That never happened.
Never.
I can speak sort of generally to some of the conflicts sometimes there are between what people say they want versus what performs well in the app. Generally speaking, if you ask somebody, hey, would you like the option to do this in the app? They're going to say yes. Like, few people will say, no, limit my choices, right?
Shut me down.
But then if you give someone an app that's just crammed full of a bunch of different stuff that's, you know, hard to use, they're going to reject it and find it too overwhelming to be fun. And so that's something we run up against a lot, is that, trying to map what people say they want to what they actually do when we build it. So if anyone knows the answer to that, let me know.
That's right. Stop telling Instagram you want stuff you don't actually want, y'all. I think that's, you just tell them.
We went through an iteration of the pbs.org redesign once that was sort of data informed and data gone awry, I would say, where we learned from talking with our users that they really wanted a different organization for content. They don't really necessarily think about individual show brands, which is how the site was organized, but they are interested in news, or they might be interested in music, or they might be interested in travel. And so we came up with this notion of topic pages, and they were organized around these genres. And then the data informed gone awry is the product team created a auto-generated topic page, so it would update automatically. And what happened is, yes, you had this travel section full of travel content, but it had no sense of journalistic integrity, editorial voice. It was just a bunch of stuff. And nobody used it because that's not what people want. They want content with a voice and a personality and a more curated experience. And so here you had data that created what should have been a pseudo-personalized experience that wasn't really all that meaningful.
That's really interesting. So, and we talk a lot about sort of, actually, we have a student question on this idea of the capacity that data give us to be personalized or to be increasingly customized, and yet maybe that's not always the experience that people want to have. Is that, I don't know, do you guys do, I know you do paid advertising, you do paid social. To what extent are you trying to create this sort of customized experience through the advertising?
That gets tricky just because the tough part about social, I always like to describe it as the only form of advertising that really is communicative both to the user and the user back to the advertiser. So if somebody, let's say, sees a broadcast unit that they hate, if anyone in here is familiar with Chevy's Real People Not Actors commercials, sometimes they're just really not that popular. And I'm not gonna hold that opinion, but some people hold it. But they can't yell at their TV and be like, goodness gracious, Chevy, this is a terrible ad. They're gonna come to the social platform and tell us there. So although we do try to create experiences that are really catered to our users tend to be very temperamental just because that's how social is. And I think it's really hard from a data perspective to measure apples to apples. Okay, well, this experience performed poorly because we got so many negative comments, whereas that day there could have been a large media buy happening in broadcast that just really made our community upset. Or there could have been a news piece of coverage come out that really made our community upset. So for us, when it comes to really creating those custom experiences, it's always taken with a grain of salt. And for us, that's why from a measurement standpoint, we have a very, very explicit set of measurement tools that from a KPI perspective, we really try to always keep consistent so that we're not really being impacted by those news stories in the cycle, because we can be like, oh, okay, well, on that Wednesday, we can write that off because clearly, the sentiment took a big dip due to this story or whatever else.
So part of the complexity of the measurement task that you're faced with is that all of these platforms, as Amy talked about, all of these platforms are sort of influencing each other at the same time.
Yeah, and I think with social especially, it's not only you as a brand, but it's the community around you as well. So you're not just talking to a community one-to-one, the community is talking to each other, and they could be, having their own problems. So it's really hard, I think, to really make it 100% accurate all the time. And for that reason, the experimental stuff gets a little tricky.
So in some ways, you're sort of risk averse too, right? I mean,
you can be. I think you get clients that can be really energetic. We're fortunate to have some that really like to take risks. But the difficult part of that is sometimes it's just really hard to communicate if it worked.
Yeah.
And we can kind of take our guesses, but then again, you're kind of guessing. So do you want it to be a really dialed down piece of, data that is accurate, or do you want it to kind of be piecemealed based on, the things that you've noticed in your channel on an ongoing basis. It can be tough.
The answer to none of these questions has been, oh, it's a super easy gig. Go for it. Don't worry about it.
I said earlier multiple times that it's just really complicated. Like, that's just the word for data. It's complicated.
So we have another student question who asked, what are some of the potential issues you see that companies might have due to having too much data, or potential privacy issues? Is that something that you think about in your industry or in your area? I'm not going to ask Kyle.
I think we certainly, people throw around, let's just collect that data, and suddenly you end up with a lot of data that you don't know what to do with. So we, from the analytics team, really try to get people focused on what are the decisions that you're trying to make, and what data do we need to collect to answer those decisions? And do we need personal data to answer those questions? Probably not. So let's not collect personal data. We tend not to collect personal data, with the exception of one membership service. But even in our group, we don't touch that personalized data. So, but it's very much focused on let's go back to the basic of what is the question we're trying to answer. And we don't. There's a cost to collecting and keeping and storing lots of data that you may not use.
And so even if, as tools emerge to help you connect people, as you mentioned, sort of across platforms, right? So, we've been talking a lot about how do you connect, right, the TV to the phone that's in front of the TV? I mean, eventually, it seems like a lot of those possibilities will require more and more data that tells you more and more about where people are. Sort of how do we balance that out, or how do we all start thinking about that as those opportunities emerge?
I don't know if I have the answer.
Yeah, no. Okay. No one ever has that answer either.
No, it's difficult. We experience the same thing with, I think I talked earlier about multiple accounts, and how, a single person made multiple Instagram accounts.
Yeah.
And there are some times when we know they're run by the same person because they're logging in on the same phone or something like that. But other times we have no idea. And then vice versa, if there are multiple people kind of all using the same account, there's still, even though we have all of the log data and every click that happens, that's still a big unknown, and a lot of times that data, even though you have a ton of it, it can be so noisy that you don't want to make, too big of a decision on it. And that's where, the actually going out and talking to people comes in as a value.
So you're actually in the sort of safer kind of data of interviews and surveys and more traditional kinds of data collection, learning more than you would from the log data anyway.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
learning different than you would. From
That's
the log
right. Yeah, you're able to triangulate a little more than just sort of guessing based off of what the log data is.
So thinking about, and I have a bunch of questions from students on this, thinking about your own roles and sort of how you got to the places that you got, how should students start to think about preparing themselves for careers in these spaces? And I wouldn't, if we wouldn't mind, maybe all of you could answer, because I think that's probably looks a little different in each of your spaces.
Yeah, I can go first. I was just talking about this earlier. So I came to Michigan State and really focused on advertising. And during my experience here, I knew that I wanted to do social media and really be in digital, but I didn't really know if analytics was a thing. I didn't understand what that role looked like if I was searching for jobs. Didn't understand all the things that I could do while here that would really help me in my career. And I could go on and on about that topic. There are so many things that you could do, obviously. You could spend your whole life teaching yourself for a job that you're never going to get. But I think the best thing that you can do, and that I would have done, is to really understand data at the base level, and through that, really understand Excel. So for me, when I started straight out of school, I sat down. I was working in analytics at a PR agency, and I sat down with my lead, and he was walking me through this weekly report that we would have to do. And he's like, "Yep." And so then you just take all this data and you put it into a pivot table. He's like, "You know what a pivot table is?" And I was like, I totally know what a pivot table is. And then I went back to my computer and Googled, what is a pivot table and what am I supposed to do with it? And I mean, it all worked out. I know how to use them now, but had I, while in college, just kind of gotten a little bit more comfortable with working with numbers and not been so against them just because I was in advertising and I felt like I wasn't supposed to, I think I would have just been kicked off a little bit stronger when I started.
And so when you got there and you started working with the data, I don't know, did it turn on? Were you just like, oh, I like this, or how did that feel?
Yeah, it did. I mean, I really like working with numbers, and I think for me, I always wanted to be a content strategist, but you really can't be a strategist and decide what type of content to create unless you know what type of content works. And the only way to understand what works is really with data. And when you have that, I think, foundational understanding of data, you can then do what I do now and really work with the analytics team and understand their language to communicate that to whoever you need to, and really to help communicate that to your content as well.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think that an understanding and facility with data is probably the most important thing. I think that the research methods and skills you're taught here at Michigan State are absolutely transferable to, say, the UX field. I think that at its core, we do a lot of interviews, we do a lot of diary studies, focus groups, surveys, experiments, and yeah, it's adapted to an app. And maybe there's a new way of collecting that data, but in the end, it's really the same core research methods that have been around for 100 years. And that is really like the basis that you build off of. I think a lot of the other things that are specific to working at Instagram or whatever company it is are things you can pick up on the job or pick up sort of as you're kind of prepping for interviewing and that sort of thing. And also, of course, like the ways in which we analyze data change over time. I feel like a little bit of a dinosaur at work because I don't do my analysis in R, and so I need to fix that soon. But being able to do analysis in R or Python, and then being able to use SQL, that's a huge thing too. Being able to, because then that gives you access to all the log data, and your analyses can be so much richer if you can append log data to, say, a survey that you've done.
That's amazing. So you're talking, actually, both of you are talking about the balance of basics that you could pay attention to in college versus what you can learn on your own. How do you motivate yourself to acquire these new skills? I'm coming back to you, by the way.
For me, I think it's understanding like what's at the end of the tunnel. So like I mentioned, I wanted to be a content strategist, but when I was at Michigan State, I didn't know what that meant. And I remember mentioning to Andy Corner, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to be a content strategist. And he was like, Erica, you can't start out being a content strategist. Like, you have to do something else first. So for me, it was like, okay, well, that's what I want to do. And if I want to do that, I really have to understand data. And if you want to go into digital at all, like, you have to have that foundation of data. So for me, really the kicker behind me was really just moving up to the next level and getting where I wanted to be.
Yeah. For me, I think I need structure to force myself to do things that I find boring. And so I love analysis when I have a research question to answer, right? And that's what made me love doing research in the context of my time here. But learning R for the sake of learning R, that's very boring. And so I need to do things like online classes and things like this that hold me accountable to actually reading and doing that sort of stuff. But yeah.
And Amy, what do you think about in terms of how should students prepare themselves for careers in your part of the industry?
Well, so I'd echo everything that Erica and Kyle said. And then I would say get as much hands-on experience as you can. I know it's hard. It's hard sometimes to get data sets to analyze, but if you have a website, throw some Google Analytics on it and start collecting it and learning the tools. Or there's a lot of different organizations out there like Data for Cause or Data for Good or Data for whatever, where you can volunteer and go learn some data science and data visualization tools on real data. I also would say get involved with any local organizations that you can. So when you were talking about the Digital Analytics Association, like if there's a local chapter event, go attend and go hear what those people are talking about and network with them, because that's what those things are for. And I'm sure there's advertising related ones here too and what have you. So do as much networking as you can, because that's how you're going to actually get in the door. And there's all kinds of meetups and what have you that people talk about and give presentations like this about what they're doing, and you can go ask more questions.
And in terms of, so we are all in a college of communication, and I feel like I've heard you all talking about that translation role a little. I want to sort of push on that a little bit. Is there a special thing that our students can bring to this field? Is there a special role for the sort of the communicator, the person who's got the kinds of storytelling skills that come out of a program like this?
I'd say yes. I mean, that's the one thing that everybody's looking for. If you read digital analytics job descriptions, they describe.
That sounds fun.
They describe a unicorn of you need to know data science and SQL and R, and you need to be able to tell great stories, and you need to be able to put together awesome PowerPoint presentations, and you need to be able to. And the reality is, no one can do all of those, but you're in a school of communication, so bring those communication skills. We desperately need them. Those are the people that we can't find. There's plenty of statisticians out there or technical people, but the technical people tend not to be very good at communicating with the business leaders.
Right, no, I definitely agree. And I would say it even goes beyond just like that, making good PowerPoints and good public speaking and just sort of like interpersonal influence around the water cooler, right? Because I feel like that's really how all the persuasion and decisions get made. We all sit in the same area and it's open floor plan and we're talking all the time. And I feel like that's sort of like how ideas sort of get, culturated and then decided upon, rather than I gave a formal presentation and then that was it. So that's a big part of it. And I think the other sort of angle to the storytelling part or the communication training we get here is thinking through all the ways in which we study human behavior and all the theories we have around why people do different things, whether it's like how they make a decision, how they change their behavior, theories of social support, relationship escalation, de-escalation. All these things are incredibly valuable in terms of like ways of sort of asking questions about a prototype or knowing where to start and developing questions, about a particular feature. And so I think that those theories that we learned here are a great roadmap to help you kind of know where to start as you're trying to unpack the human behavior as it's related to the app you're working on.
So you still have that sort of like scholar orientation at Instagram. Does that make you popular?
Nope. Didn't before, doesn't now. They're very goal-oriented, and so if, you can sort of argue that this will help us get there quicker, then they'll happily listen to. Yeah, but otherwise, it's a hard sell.
I'll add to that too, that as students, I would encourage you to not view your career as a student and as someone who's learning as being separate like areas. So you can be someone who wants to be an amazing account person and still learn data. And on the vice versa, if you want to be a data analyst, you can still take a class on public speaking and really understand how to be a good client manager. I think the people who can do all of that, as you mentioned, are like unicorns. They just don't always exist. And when you can really understand the other side, of the conference room, whether that's analytics, creative, whatever it is, you just have a little bit more edge and can kind of have empathy, honestly, toward the other departments that you work with, and that just makes you a stronger practitioner.
And so how is it set up for you? Like, how do you work with these different functions? Because we were talking about this earlier, and I think it's really revealing, unpack the complexity of what does it take to get a Chevy truck in front of my face.
Oh man, do you guys want to sit here all day?
No. Give us like the short version, the short awesome version.
So I guess one really good thing to know, and I'll keep this short, but if you're thinking about going into agencies, there are separate teams that usually work on a single client. So I work on the Chevrolet team for social. We have about 30 people that represent all of the creative execution and content creation. People like me who manage the client while simultaneously doing the content strategy, and then an analytics team who's really the ones that are into all the data every day. So for me, if I'm the only one from the team that's going over to our clients to talk about trucks, I need to talk about trucks, whether that's talking about how the content performed with our analytics team, talking about this new cool idea that we have with our creative team. I have to bring in all of that, to one client person as me with being one person myself. So I think the complexity when you're in an agency is really understanding, okay, how can I tell the story that all of these different people are really working to create in a concise way to my team? And right now we're talking about that being with data, but you have to do that with a lot of other things too. So if you do think about going into agency, I would really encourage you to understand the different roles that you'll be working with, not only what you yourself will be doing, but also, the different people that you'll be interacting with.
So similar to what Kyle was saying, the sort of the capacity to communicate across these silos and to talk in these different ways. So we had, and Amy, I'll start with you on this one, because you are a trailblazer. We had a question from several students asking, what is it like to be a woman in this industry? What are there challenges in particular for women in the digital analytics data kind of world in general? And if there are challenges, what are we doing to overcome them?
I think it's great. So I'm going to say yes, it's a great place. We need more women in analytics. I think generally at the entry level within analytics, I see a pretty even split. Where we're still struggling in the industry is women in leadership positions, and that's been sort of my passion within my work at the Digital Analytics Association. How do we get more women into more leadership positions? So that I firmly believe that you can't be what you can't see. So I want to see more women and more minorities as well in those positions. And it's hard, I think the thing is reaching for me as someone who's a senior person in analytics is reaching back and helping people see this as a career and that this can be a great and interesting career. And I would say like stop worrying about the math. Like so many times I just sit on women in analytics panels and there are women who say like, I don't know, the math seems it's like the most difficult math I do most days is an average. So like you've got it. Don't worry about it.
And you can use a calculator, right? You're allowed to use a
tools, like,
calculator.
right? R will do the math for you.
Well, not for Kyle, but
Someday.
So, but I think there's like that's what it's an exciting, and I want all of you to we need more analysts. So like there's plenty of jobs out there. So don't be afraid of it. It's really exciting and interesting, and it's going to continue to evolve. This is a very, very rapidly changing profession, and that's what makes it exciting.
And why aren't there more women at the top in analytics? What's your diagnosis of that?
I think it really roots back to in the early days of analytics, analysts tended to come out of the web developer side and tended to be much more technical. And it wasn't until a little later when people started reaching into, like, I came from consumer research. There's plenty of women in consumer research. And so being able to look across disciplines and bring people in, like, and many of the people that I've hired on my team came from other disciplines, but they've been the best analysts. So I hired somebody who had no experience in digital analytics but was a research analyst, and I knew she knew how to think. You have to ask good questions and think about how you're going to approach an analysis and how am I going to look at the data. Data is just data. So I think that is one way that we can bring more people is looking across. I have another person who was a journalist, and he just fell in love with data, and he's like really amazing and has become more technical over the years. But he's also a good storyteller because he knows he used to sit with a camera out on the weather truck and decided that data was more important. So there's like reaching into some cross disciplines. So I really love about your program here is being able to reach into there, find more people.
And how about your perspective?
Yeah, at my level, I mean, I'm very much more junior. I'm still kind of early in my career, pretty green. And for me, I think the biggest thing that you can do as a woman in the workplace is really just speak up and raise your hand when you want to, and don't be afraid. And I know that you've probably heard that 1,000 times, because I know that I did while I was here. But just from the experience of going from sitting where you are to being in the agency, not many women do. I find it very impressive when, people, I work on a very largely female team, and we are all like, very, very straightforward and very willing to speak up and go to a leadership meeting and say what we want. But I find that that's not always the case. And so although you guys hear it preached to you, I would really encourage you to practice it as well. And it could be kind of terrifying and everything. But I mean, am I a little afraid being up here? Yeah, probably. I'm stuttering a little bit, but
you seem super chill.
Whatever. But the worst that anyone can say from a manager perspective or anything is no. And I mean, that's to salary negotiations, that's to asking to be on a new project, that's to asking to have an informational interview with someone. I mean, in most cases, for one, they're not going to say no. They'll give you a nice PR spun answer, so it's soft anyway. And two, a lot of the times they will say yes, or if anything, if they do say no, they'll come up with an alternative for how they can try to work in whatever you're asking for. So just don't be afraid and just rock it, listen to some good music and feel good about it and go do the thing.
That sounds like really good advice. And one nitty-gritty question about careers this is a student submission. If I want to work with data in any of your industries, what kinds of job titles should I be looking for? We've talked a lot about this today. Actually, it's a hard gig to find. What's everyone's take on that?
Yeah, so the approach I took was to sort of stalk people on LinkedIn and look for people working generally in the industries or companies that I wanted to work at, and just look to see what their job descriptions have been throughout their careers and the labels. And you can get a pretty good idea pretty quickly of sort of what different things are called in different professions. I also did a lot of informational interviews with people, and I was shocked at the number of people who said yes. A lot of people were very kind and willing to volunteer 20 minutes to kind of talk to me about what it's like working in market research, and yeah, hearing just how they talk about their jobs and hearing how they talk about the industry really gives you a leg up in interviews, because if you can already speak the language, especially if they're a little nervous about you coming from someplace different, a different industry or something, that can really go a long way to assuage things. But yeah.
I don't know, I would say to use things like Indeed and go type in the word analyst or social media or insights and just see what
Try
pops
all the
up.
words.
Yeah, see what pops up because that's actually where I start when I start writing job descriptions. I look at what other job postings other people have and start plucking things that I like out of them. So it's a perfectly valued. It's like Google for jobs. So
And do you have to have, if these guys are coming out of college looking at a job ad, do you have to have every single qualification? It sounds like you guys are describing how companies advertise for unicorns. Do you yourself have to be a unicorn to apply?
no.
No.
No, like when you see on there, must have 2 to 4 years of experience. If you think you can do that job, apply, and demonstrate. Okay? Well, I would give you one really good tip that people don't do anymore. Use a cover letter, because I know it sounds old fashioned, but that's where you can actually demonstrate to me, the hiring manager, that you can be articulate and that you have something interesting to bring to the position. And it's generally the resumes that have no cover letter that I pass over. And I would say most of them don't these days. So yeah,
Because they're submitting online.
they're submitting. But if you have an option of a cover letter, that's a place that you can sell yourself and spend. It doesn't have to be long. It's like 10 minutes of why you would be uniquely good for that position. And okay, if they have asking, well, most people will put 2 to 4 years on of job experience on an entry level job. So just ignore it.
Yeah, even just on the resume too, you can
Yeah.
do a lot of customizing. Yeah, it's frustrating to get, a resume that it's very clear that this was photocopied and sent to 500 people.
I would say too, the one rule that I always tell everyone, I used to work in career services, and like the number one thing that you can take away is that a job description is a wish list. It's not a grocery list. So although, yeah, like it'd be great if you fulfill every single bullet, odds are that person doesn't exist. I mean, maybe, it might be you, but odds are it doesn't, so you should definitely apply. When it comes to the job titles, on the agency side at least, that is very, very tricky. So I would encourage that you instead try to find an agency that you really like, a place where you really like their clients. You can tell that they have a lot of data and analytics in whatever office you're looking at. So at Weber Shandwick, for example, like my title, although I'm a content strategist, my actual title is Senior Associate Client Experience Digital, which I know that you all know what that means. It's very difficult.
Obviously.
Obviously. But Weber Shandwick, we have a lot of offices that specialize in analytics. So let's say that you found Weber Shandwick and you were like, wow, I really like the work that they're doing with this client. I'm going to do some research. That's when I would recommend going to like LinkedIn Jobs or Indeed and really looking through. And if you see some stuff that seems kind of, analytics based and it's all based in Boston, that might be because they have a Boston hub. And then you can find someone based in Boston and hit that dude up on LinkedIn and say, hey, I want to know a little bit about the Boston office. I'm really interested in this. And that will really kind of help create the path for you. I don't think that you're going to find a title that's going to fit exactly what you want, but I do think that you can kind of find your niche if you get in the right door. It's all about getting your foot in the door and then finding the job, I think, after you kind of get a feel for the agency or respective company.
Okay, so last question, then we'll open up to Q&A. So think of your questions so I don't have to stare you down individually. And I get asked this by students all the time. They're about to graduate. Many of these guys are about to graduate. Can they do a job now in any of these industries without involving data? Is that possible? Do those exist?
I think it's going to be hard. I think you have to at least understand data and know what data you can use for what question and be able to at least sift through the noise. Some of these providers provide a lot of data that doesn't actually mean anything. So Facebook being one, right? So you go into Facebook Insights, there's a ton of metrics, and most of them aren't really all that meaningful to you. So being able to have at least that much literacy to be able to understand what's available and what I can use for what is important, no matter what your role ends up being in an organization.
I'll say too that, you're never going to do a campaign and then not have your boss or manager ask how it went. And you have to have data to explain how it went. So regardless of where you end up, whether it is really focused on data or focused on something else, your client, boss, whoever is going to want to know how something performed, and you can't tell that story unless you have the analytics. So I would kind of say no. I don't want to be that harsh, but possibly.
You can be that harsh.
Yeah.
It's day to day.
It always helps.
Yeah.
Is this on? Oh. Did I turn this on?
Uh-oh.
There we go. Okay. There's a secret button on the bottom, FYI. Yeah, even graphic designers that I work with who are pure creative people, they don't want to release a product that's terrible that everyone hates. And so they're very curious to see the research that I'm doing and see how their product designs are performing. And they want to get better at, iterate on this design to make it better. And so they want to know how sessions work and how I'm doing things. And then, even to demonstrate their impact, to their bosses when they're trying to get a raise, they want to know, all right, well, did this increase metrics, right, versus the control group? Like, so they're, even if it's not like...
You mean what do you mean?
Like if you redesigned something and in the test versus control group, you saw people used Instagram, 2% more. You can hang your hat on that, right? That's a very concrete thing in a data-driven company. And so even people who aren't working with data can use data as a way to make sure what they're doing isn't a mess, and then also to kind of measure the size of the impact.
All right, thank you all very much. And now we have time for some questions from the audience. If you're willing to go over there, I know that even as I look to that podium, it looks a little stressful. But those of you, the first question's on that side, if you would be willing to head over to the podium to ask your questions. Thank you, brave soul.
With redesign, especially when it comes to Instagram. So I think it was last month or so, Instagram rolled out the horizontal feature for swiping. Did you know this was coming?
The right word.
Yeah, and then all of us consumers pretty much lost our minds for a little bit because we didn't know how to operate with that. Was that something that you got during your sessions with people where they actually enjoyed it, or how did that come back to you? Because I know you guys got some heat for that.
Yeah, we get heat for everything though, and so you get immune to the press reactions. An accident, an engineer literally clicked the wrong button, and so that was not supposed to happen. Okay. That had been in testing for 6-7 months, and so that was a little kind of accidental data collection on top of the stuff we'd already been doing. I think what's always difficult when you're doing things that are very different or big changes, it's trying to figure out how to quantify how much of the resistance is due to anything that's really new versus how much of it is still going to bother people in the long term or still worse in the long term. And I don't have a great answer for that. We try to do kind of longer exposure experiments to see, okay, we call it novelty effects. And so the first couple of days in experiments running, we just sort of kind of ignore the data because something weird's going to happen. It's either going to be really negative or really positive, but then after a week or two, it tends to kind of level off. And then that's the real data that we'll base decisions off of. But when it's something like that one where it's so drastic, it's hard to know just how long we would have had to run that before we could make a decision.
So has that been kiboshed? Did it just after that accident? Did it just kind of get tossed out the window? Or is that still something?
She wants all your secrets.
Yeah. I'm not so sure I should talk about that.
That's fine.
Wait and see.
Yeah.
Next question. If anyone has a question, especially those of you over here, if you wouldn't mind heading over there, just so it's a long walk.
Kyle, I have another question for you. So when you're synthesizing that VOC data and understanding the pain points of customer or of users, how are you able to express the value of those pain points and of those complaints from customers and users to higher management to get that value for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I don't have a great answer to that yet, but I was talking about that earlier where, there are times, the ideal scenario is when, a feature or a change asked, for by users leads to an increase in metrics and everybody's happy. But there are times when, people may want something or there's some adjustment that we make that leads to a little bit of a decrease in usage. The end of feed demarcator is one that you're all caught up. And when we think about that, we have to sort of weigh. It's a calculus that sort of goes beyond research in some ways, because it's sort of like a business decision. If I can quantify the increase in sentiment, right, and we can do social media listening to see what's happening on Twitter and all of that, in addition to the servers I run. But it ends up being a kind of a business decision. The argument I've always made is that the more people can sort of have a strong mental model for how Instagram works, the more likely they are to feel comfortable using it, to find it enjoyable, and to want to spend time on it. And so I try to make the argument that it's a long game, that even though there may be small decreases in time spent as a result of changes requested by users, in the end we're building a product that's going to be stickier and people are going to want to stick with over time.
And then also going off of that, so when you're pulling that data, and let's say you use Twitter, for example, how are you quantifying Twitter and tweets to making that, push in the value of why you're making the change?
Yeah, so I actually don't deal with that. We have like a communication team that I think they outsource the Twitter analysis, and so I'm not super familiar with that. I think, and maybe you can speak to this more, but like open text analysis is still pretty rudimentary. Like it doesn't seem like there's great ways yet of really assessing sentiment, if you're not, human coding things. Is that accurate?
No, that's correct. When our analytics team pulls anything from Twitter, it gets very, very, very tricky because you're pulling in like dealer messages. And like if we're looking at like the word like capable, I mean, people use that incorrectly all the time. So then you have to like individually as like human go through and try to remove anything that's inaccurate, and the data just gets really messy. And if you're pulling something large, I mean, that can take days upon days. And like at the end of the day, is it really worth it if it's going to take that much manpower and that many hours? So yeah, that's.
Yeah, I think a lot of times we're looking at overall volume, and if there's a spike and it's a good thing, then cool. But if there's a spike and it's tied to a bad thing, then we sort of have some metric for
Less cool.
how much, yeah, also less cool, and we have some idea of what the impact of it was.
So then both for Chevrolet and for Instagram, what would be the best way as users if we have a complaint to kind of send that forward? Is that through the App Store? Is that through Twitter?
Literally coming for you now. Just
Not
email
Twitter.
Kyle.
Yes, after emailing me, I would say App Store reviews. Yeah, we call it Flytrap, which is basically submitting, a comment through the Help Center.
Okay.
I think those are probably the two best ways.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions? You can raise your hand and shout it out if you don't feel comfortable getting up. Oh, all right. Actually, you can't because I can't hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, just to comment on that, the thing about sentiment analysis and how can you trust them, especially like someone mentioned bots before, but especially with like troll armies and like sometimes you would see discrepancy between, let's say, a show, it's performing really well on Netflix or Amazon Prime, but you look at Twitter and it's just like some negative, like high volume of negative comments. And unless you go through them and like you won't know if they're actual people or just one message got repeated 1,000 times. So my question is at your point, and this is for everybody, to what extent do you rely on sentiment analysis or analysis of text or videos with measuring it against the quantitative data you have, whether from number of views, reach, engagement, etc.?
I can go really quick. For us, we'll look at it. So we always pull a sentiment analysis just to really see like if we made a new vehicle announcement, like how is the community reacting? Are they reacting negatively? Are they reacting positively? But for us at the end of the day, like what's going to sell a vehicle isn't like Bob from Minnesota like yelling at our social channel. So although we do pull that and we like to kind of keep it in the back of our mind, for us there are much greater like ways to really weigh performance. We look at paid data a lot more than we look at like a sentiment analysis, just because from a paid perspective, like we know that that person is clicking through and creating an action that we can actually like loosely tie back to a vehicle sale. Whereas someone commenting on a post and maybe talking about it on Twitter, like that person just could have had a bad day. Going back to my earlier point about people just taking out their energy on social. So although we pull it, it's not anything that we like weigh really heavily from like a legitimacy standpoint.
Yeah, Twitter just seems like a cranky place. And so I don't put a lot of weight into it, and it's sort of not my division anyway. But, we also have like very, very large scale tracking surveys that we're randomly sampling people every day to ask questions about overall sentiment and things like that. And we put a lot more weight into those because we know, the method behind them, and we know how things were sampled. And, we had all the questions localized and translated and cognitive tested and all that sort of stuff. And so I think we put more weight in the research we do ourselves where we sort of know the quality. That said, no one likes getting, yelled at on Twitter, right? And so I think there's sort of like an emotional component too. But yeah.
And we look, especially in programs where we have a big social campaign around them, we will pull the data. And we'll do sort of a sentiment analysis 2 different ways. So we have a tool that we can use, but then I have an analyst on my team who likes to just read through everything, and she classifies them into buckets. And we look at it. We don't put a lot of stock in it, but occasionally you'll end up with situations where somebody picked up on one comment on Facebook and then it becomes lore about that program. So there was an example of a show that we did in the summertime where somebody posted about, there was a number of people posting about, I watched this show with my kids, and then an executive turned that into, well, it didn't rate well, but there was a ton of co-viewing. Well, the Nielsen ratings can tell us whether there's co-viewing, and there wasn't a ton of co-viewing. There wasn't really any at all, but it became lore. So for some of those things, our team is supposed to be there to be like the reality check and to be like, wait a minute. And that's probably why we don't put a ton of stock into it.
We are out of time, but I want to say a special thank you to all of you. It was so amazing. We learned a ton. So thank you.